basically every industry, including healthcare, financial service, telecommunications, and most recently in the manufacturing industry. Specifically, what I did in human resources, I was what you call a specialist, and my area of specialty was corporate recruiting. I have recruited anywhere from entry-level positions like food service aides and certified nursing assistants to recruiting for mid-level professionals such as marketing professionals, accountants, auditors, all the way up to senior level executives, VPs, attorneys, and directors, and so forth. And the one commonality that I always saw, no matter what industry, functional area, or field I was recruiting for, was this thing called the war for talent, which many of you probably have heard of. You may ask the question, well, now with so many people being laid off, does that war for talent still exist? And the answer to that question is yes, it does, and I'll explain that a little bit later. On a personal note, I have done volunteer work for the past 14 years. I've worked with the elderly, I've worked with the youth, and then recently I've worked with women in shelters. I do the volunteer work through my church, and what we do is we go into 2 local shelters and we do training. Specifically, what I train on is career readiness. And these women come from all different backgrounds. Some of them have very limited educational backgrounds, where some of them have 4-year degrees. The one common thing that I see with all of these women is, number one, they don't always feel very comfortable with going through the employment process. They don't always understand what type of format or how to even put the resume together. They always have questions about the whole employment process. What are some questions that I can ask? What do I put on my employment application? What about this background check and the drug screening and negotiating salaries? They just always have a lot of questions. And I also noticed that a lot of them are missing what we call soft skills, which is if you're working in a corporate environment, understanding the importance of working in a team, understanding the importance of thinking outside the box, knowing how to dress appropriately, understanding what's acceptable behaviors in certain types of environments. I bring all of this up because this leads to why I came up with the concept of workforce solutions. There's a gap. The gap is that, number one, people are missing the soft skills. Even though there are individuals who have the technical skills and they may have the educational requirements and the relevant experience, there's this gap in terms of the soft skills. There's also a gap in terms of being able to compete for positions. You can have all the education and all the experience, but if you cannot come to an interview and present that to those who are interviewing you and convince them that you are able to do this job, you're not going to get the job. So there are 2 areas that I see a gap, and that's where I see my services coming into play. The value proposition that I believe that I bring is threefold. One is I consider myself to be a subject matter expert. I've worked in corporate recruiting for the past 13 years. I'm constantly reading. I'm a member of several professional organizations, always trying to stay on top of what the latest trends are. For example, in recruiting now, it's all of the social media with the Twitter and the LinkedIn and those Facebooks and MySpace and so forth. The other thing that I bring is what I consider the real world experience. A lot of times, some of the individuals who are doing training in workforce development really don't have a corporate background. They don't have a human resources background. So they don't really have what I consider the practical experience. So I bring the practical experience, the subject matter expertise, and then also I've always had a passion for serving the underserved. And that's really who my target market is. So with those 3 things in mind, that's the value proposition that I bring.